We're going to begin with a quote from the Athanasian Creed, which goes, "Now the Catholic faith is this, that we worship one God in Trinity and Trinity in unity. The Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Ghost is God, and yet there are not three gods, but one God. This is the Catholic faith, which, except a man believe faithfully and steadfastly, he cannot be saved." So beginning with the divine unity, to speak of the procession of the divine persons of God, we need to grasp as well as we can the unity of the divine nature. Once we're clear in our minds that God cannot be more than one in substance, and that he cannot exist alongside any other like himself, we are then in a good position to treat of and understand something of those other subsisting realities that make up the Holy Trinity. God has to be infinite and eternal, otherwise he would not be God. And without a God, we are left with nothing at all. He has to be infinite in all the perfections that are attributed to him as the supreme being. You cannot set limits on an eternal creator. There is no sounding the depths of God. And for this very reason that God is, we must understand that there cannot be two infinite beings. It doesn't make sense. One would simply cancel out the other. It's simply a contradiction in terms. If there were two or more equally supreme beings, none of them will be God, because God lacks nothing, and if there were another like him, he would be lacking insofar as the other would be its own existence outside of and independent of God's existence. So the idea is just plainly false. The voice from the burning bush said to Moses, "I am who am." This was God's simple and profound statement of his essence. He was claiming to be the one and only true deity. The name he gave was not so much a name as straightforward. It was more a straightforward signification of his essence. For the speaker to disclose what he is to tell us who he is. Because through the nature of the speaker, we come to the knowledge of the one who speaks. So the essentials of an intellectual being we're going to look at now. So, an incorporeal substance that lives is an intellectual being. We affirm God to be pure intelligence, but deny him a body because this implies imperfection and limitation. So we're dealing with a being that is immaterial. It doesn't fall under the senses, it doesn't connect with a body, and it cannot be grasped in material terms. We have to understand the activities of an intellectual being if we're to begin to understand God. So, there are two main acts essential to the mind to understand. The two acts that are essential to the mind is to understand and to will. This happens in God because he is the supreme mind, whereas with us, our mind by nature conceives thoughts and our will acts freely, but these actions remain within us whether or not they are reduced to word or action, and yet while they are from us, they are not us. So this is the big difference. Thus my thought is not myself, yet it remains within me. The movement of my will is from me and stays in me, but it's not me. In God's case, however, the conception of the mind is from him and remains in him. Likewise, the movement of his will is from him and remains in him. However, because of the perfection, the simplicity, and the incommunicability of the divine nature, these acts are themselves identified with the principle from whence they proceed. So, in other words, they are God. God, therefore, sees through knowledge, and his will is directed to the object of his knowledge, which is the truth and the perfection of the divine essence. So the real persons in God, beginning with the definition, a person, from the Latin word persona, which originally meant a mask for actors, or according to the Greeks, a hypostatis, is properly defined by Boethius as an individual substance of a rational nature. Here we have the three requisite qualifications for personality. A person is a substance, that is something existing in itself, such as an orange, not merely inhering in something else, such as the color of the orange. A person is individual, that is possessing complete and distinct individuality without in any sense being part of or common to something else. On account of this, neither the human body nor the human soul separately can be called a person. A person is also rational, that is, having the faculty of reason and not merely a certain cleverness that can be found in certain animals. There are three subsisting realities in the divinity that fulfill the requirements of personhood and that are distinct on account of the four real relations in God, which we will treat of further on. These persons, while sharing the same divine nature, have an order of the first, the second, and the third. They are the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So the two processions in God. In God we say the Son proceeds from the Father, and the Holy Ghost proceeds from the Father and the Son. The Son is said to proceed from the divine intellect, while the Holy Ghost proceeds from the divine will. The first procession is called generation because it's the property of the mind to conceive or beget a thought or word. Thus we have the procession of the Word, which is the eternal self-expression of the Father, the one in God who possesses inaccessibility. The second procession, which is said to have no special name, is simply called procession, and it is the proceeding of the Holy Ghost from the Father through his Son. So there are four relations in God. There is the relation of paternity, whereby the first person is related to the second. Filiation, whereby the second person is related to the first, common. Spiration, whereby the first and the second persons are related to the third. And finally, procession, whereby the third person is related to the first and the second. We admit to there being paternity and filiation in God because what proceeds eternally from the divine intellect is both from it as from the principle of the whole deity and yet remains identified with it, just as the ray of sun is of the sun and streams forth from it, but remains also with it as its brightness and splendor. Thus the Son never leaves the Father, though he is from him, Deum verum de Deo vero, true God of true God. Now as love comes from knowledge, the Father and Son are related to the third person by spiration. Spiration indicates breathing, which concerns the operating of the heart. It is used in theology to signify the eternal operation of love in God, which has its object in the divine essence itself. For love to be real and perfect in God, it must come from the conception of his own supreme goodness. God comprehends himself in and through the Son and loves himself in and through the Holy Ghost. Since the Son is the object of the Father's intellect, both Father and Son are related to the Holy Ghost by the common love they have for all that is understood in the intellectual light of the divinity. They are related to the third person by a kind of eternal sighing, breathing, and throbbing of love, which is the joy and happiness of being God. The Holy Ghost, who is himself the spiration of the Father and the Son, is related to them as to the mind and thought from whence he proceeds. Hence he is related to them by procession. So this is the basic doctrine of the Blessed Trinity. We have perfect fatherhood, perfect sonship, and perfect communication of love in the divinity. Our destiny as children of God is to be raised up to participation in the divine life and to contemplate forever the mystery of the adorable Trinity.